Next, we're going to make the chimneys that go in the project. There are 2 of them, and I think you can see here that I have one completed. And it's a very basic construction. It has 2 wider sides, 2 narrower sides, and 2 support pieces for each chimney. Now these go together wide, narrow, just with some construction strips and butt joints. So I'll get that together. And once the 4 sides are in a row, you can just turn the ends in and butt the last 2 sides together and give that a good burnish as well. And now we're ready to talk about pattern paper. For the pattern paper for the chimney, we want to cover one of our little support pieces. That's going to be seen inside of the chimney, down inside of here, so choose a paper for that. And then for the body of the chimney, we're going to use a piece that is 4 3/4 wide by 3 1/4 tall. 4 3/4 wide, 3 1/4 tall, and then we need to do some scoring. We're going to score it 1/2, 1 3/8, 2 3/4, and 3 5/8. So 1/2, 1 3/8, 2 3/4, and 3 5/8. And then on the shorter, the trim for the top, I've cut a piece that is 1 inch tall and 4 3/4 inches wide, so 1 by 4 3/4. We need to do some scoring on the bottom edge, so up from the bottom edge, and make sure if you're using directional paper, you're coming up from the bottom. We'll make a score at 3/8 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch. And then coming across here, we're going to just offset our scoring from the main piece just a little bit. So we're going to start at 3/4 of an inch, then go to 1 5/8, then 3 inches, and then 3 7/8. So that was 3/4, 1 5/8, 3, and 3 7/8. And now we can fold on these score lines and then prep with score tape for covering, and I will do that and be back to show you the next steps. So I have my paper prepped with score tape. You can see on the big piece it's just on all 4 edges. On this small piece I've put a strip on each side of the score here, and then on the chimney I put a strip on the left edge of each face. Now when we go to put the chimney in, the paper on, sometimes it's helpful to have the chimney being square. So I'm just kind of temporarily putting one of the support pieces in there. I'm not gluing it in yet, just so it can kind of help keep the chimney square as we put the paper on. I should say that I inked the edges on this little piece, and I inked the bottom edge, the narrower edge on the trim piece, and of course the vertical edges on all of the pieces. So to put this on, I'm just going to remove some score tape backing here from the 1/2 inch score and get these other ones kind of started. And we're going to put that 1/2 inch on the back side there, and I'm just lining it up using the side here. These scores have been sized so they should wrap around nicely and make square edges on your chimney. So you'll just continue going around and removing score tape backing and putting this paper on. And it just goes edge to edge, Nothing fancy about this. So I'm going to finish putting this on and then I'll be back. Now for the trim, we're going to start it with the 3/4 inch score. And I have to just reinforce mine here a little bit so I can see them. And we'll start it on the same side that we had the, we started the large paper on. I'm just removing the score tape backing from that bottom 3/8 inch edge. So that score is going to line up with the corner, and I'm just kind of using the folded edge to help me get it in the right place. And then as you go around, you can use the score to help you keep it straight on the top. And just pull it around. And make sure you get these edges to meet back up here. And then we'll give that a burnish. Now for the inside, I'm just going to remove my score tape backing. And then I'm going to make some relief cuts. And let me see if I can show you. I'll come in a little closer. You can see how I'm going to do this. Now what I'm going to do on each corner is to put the tip of my scissors up, butt it up against the top of the chipboard there, and just kind of come in at an angle there, and gently hold on to that paper because it wants to stick to my scissors. And I'm going to come in at an angle on the other side as well. And I want to hold on to that little piece of paper because it'll stick to my scissors. Just leave it there and just repeat that all around. And then once we've done that all around, take the bigger pieces and just kind of fold them out. The pieces on the side, just kind of fold them out. Now you can see I already have one kind of prepped here. That's because it tore off. I wasn't careful enough to hold on to it. So I just have kind of set it back up here on the top. And what I'm going to do is just kind of wrap these to the inside. And that just kind of makes sure that those corners look nice and finished. And of course this is an optional step. If you're not as concerned about the corners, don't worry about it. But if you just take them and push them down, you can use the corner of your bone folder or your fingers. I usually like to do one at a time. Just kind of support that corner and then push it down with my bone folder. Support the corner, push it down, support the corner, and push it down. And then you can just wrap these other edges in. And once those edges are in, give everything a nice burnish and then come on the inside and crisp up these corners. And once I have that all wrapped inside, I just took some ink and inked up the edges. Now I'm going to remove this temporary bottom that I put in there. I'm going to put this top down inside, just some. Here it looks like it's down about 3/8 of an inch. No further than where this pattern paper is. And we'll just push it down, but you may need to trim it off a little bit. If it looks like it's going to be too tight of a fit, just take your scissors and give it just a little bit of a haircut. On each side. Then I'll just give that a little ink. run a bead of glue inside. I would say I'm about 3/8 of an inch down. Now I can just push this little piece down, and then I can always put a finger in from the bottom to help support it. And I'll get that piece installed. I just go gently from side to side with my bone folder, kind of just pushing down just a fraction of an inch at a time until I get it where I want it to be. So now we're ready to install the chimneys in the building. And I would say they were going to be a very snug fit side to side here. So the only place I'm going to put glue is on these peaked edges of the roof, and then right here along this bottom edge. Now really you only need to put it in the corners here because the chimney fits in a little bit. So you might want to do a dry fit first just to see how it's going to work. It slides in like this. And I'll show you a way you can check to make sure you've got it plumb on the outside. So let's get my glue out and we'll put it in. I'm just kind of tilting it in. And now that I've got it in this way, I'm just taking a piece of my pattern paper and using it kind of as a guide. I have one edge flat on the table and I have this long edge here coming up. So that way I can kind of use it as a guide to see if I have my chimney in plumb. That looks, pretending that this is a flat surface, this is what I'm doing. Alternatively, if you have one of these little plastic levels, which I think is a very handy tool if you're into constructing buildings like this, you can hold that on the edge. Now, don't come up to the, I'm only coming up right underneath the trim because obviously the trim is not at the same distance out. So anyway, that's a couple of ways to check for plumb, and I'll put the other chimney in and then we'll be done with chimneys. Next, we're going to build the two side roofs. I have one already completed here, and this is sized to fit around the chimney. So let me show you how it goes on. Here's our chimney, and it fits right up here around the chimney. So that's what we're going to make next. For each side roof, we need one of the piece A's and one of the pieces that will become B and C. And they are on the cutting guide as side roof A and side roof BC. So we need to do some subcutting here. Piece A is 3 3/4 inches long, and we need to cut this shape out with the triangles and then this notch. So to get the triangles off the edges, we'll put a centering ruler on our project, find the center, and from 0 we'll measure out 1 1/16 on either side of 0. 1 1/16 on either side of 0. And then we'll connect those dots with our bottom corners. And cut off those triangles. Okay. Next we need to cut a notch for the chimney, which we know is 1 3/8 wide. And so we'll put our centering ruler down again. And when we're measuring to get 1 3/8 opening, what I like to do is just take that measurement and cut it in half. And sometimes what I do is I take each piece and cut it in half. So if we have 1 3/8, half of the inch is going to be 1/2 inch, and half of the 3/8 would be 3/16. So that's going to give me 11/16 on either side of 0. So I'll mark that, 11/16 on either side of 0. And then I want to draw, I'm going to just use my mat. So lining those up, those marks up, I'm just going to draw a perpendicular line from the edge to each one of those marks. So hopefully you can see that I've drawn these 2 lines here. And then I'm going to turn this on my mat so I have the top edge over here on my left, and I'm going to measure down 1/2 inch and make a line. And what we've just done is marked out for this notch here. So I'm going to cut that notch out. And once I have that notch cut out, I just want to test it on my chimney. It can be a little bit bigger, but obviously if it won't fit around the chimney, you'll have to cut a little sliver on each side of that notch. So that's our notch for the chimney. So that's piece A completed. And then for BC, we just want to connect the corners to make 2 triangles. There we go. When these pieces go on, it's the hypotenuse, or the angled side, that gets connected. So it goes together like so. Now when I make these connections, I like to use a piece that's too long and then trim it off. And then I would also like to say that in order to get this triangle to be simple to cut, it's just a tad too long. So you can see up here that there's just a little bit on the points. It's too long. So you can come in, you'll line up the bottom corners here, and if you have any kind of overage up here on the top, which is about 1/16 or so, just take the point of your craft knife and trim that off. Alright, so now let's join these pieces together. And I'm just taking a strip I know is too long. This one is definitely too long. And I'll just peek underneath here and get that bottom corner lined up. And then burnish this down. And then come and just trim this extra away. No matter where it is, just trim anything trim it even with your chipboard. And that'll give us a very nicely supported side. So I'll repeat this for the other side. Again, remembering it's the hypotenuse, or the long angled side, that gets connected. So now that we have our little unit assembled, we want to make a template of the front to help us with our pattern paper. So I've just got a scrap of cardstock here, and on this long edge I'm going to draw a line that's 1/2 inch away from the edge. And then I'm going to take my assembly and line up the base with that 1/2 inch line, and then I'm holding the little corners at a 90-degree angle to the surface and just tracing along that edge. Again, just holding that 90 degrees up, and whoops, hold on to it a little more carefully than I did. And draw that diagonal. Now you don't have to worry about how long it is, because we'll just come and measure 1 3/8 inches from the line that we drew before. And then we'll add another 1/2 inch to that line. So we'll use this in a few minutes when we cut our pattern paper. And here's my pattern paper. I have, let me put it on top of here so you can see it, it kind of blends into the green. For the triangles, I've got a square that is 2 1/4 inches on each side. Now, even though my paper is kind of directional, I can barely see the directionality of it. And when this goes in, you're only going to see this little bit of this corner here. But if you have paper that is definitely directional, you're going to need to cut, instead of cutting a square that you can cut a triangle out of, you're going to need to cut 2 triangles, one facing one direction and one facing the other, that have legs that are 2 1/4 inches long. And then I have a piece that is 2 3/8 inches tall, and that is what we're going to use for the body of our piece, to cover piece A. And I have it, oh, mine's a little bit more than 4 inches. The most you should probably need is 4 inches, but anyway, I have a 4-inch piece. Okay, so we're going to start with our triangle sides, and I'm just going to cut this in half diagonally. And I should say I've already prepped it with score tape on the back. And then when we go to put this on, let me get the backing off of here. The way this is going to go on is we hold it in the same orientation as our triangle, and this edge, back edge of the triangle, is going to get centered on this edge of our triangle, and it's going to go flush with that. So I'm just putting it right up to that edge, and I have about the same amount on the top and bottom. Hopefully you can see that here and here. And then I want to hold this so that the sides form a 90-degree angle here, or close to it. And then we'll wrap this edge around to the front, as if you were making a box here. And then we can take our bone folder, just kind of get a nice crease to that. Now down here on the corner, you'll want to kind of come back at an angle so that you can wrap this corner. And here obviously we have too much, so I'm just going to cut that off so I have about a 1/2 inch there. And then again, we'll have to put in an angle there, and then we can wrap that up to the inside as well. And then I'll just come along with my bone folder and neaten all of that up. And then up on the top, we'll just come with our scissors and trim that even. And And we'll repeat that process for this other side. Just again, centering it on this edge and then wrapping it around. Okay, now we can turn our attention to back to our template and covering the front of our side roof. And the first thing I'm going to do is just extend these lines that I drew if they don't meet the horizontal lines. And then what we want to do is where the angled ends intersect here, we want to draw perpendicular lines like so. Hopefully I've got this dark enough so that you can see it. And then we'll cut out our template. And once we have our template cut out, we can take it to our scoreboard and just score that bottom ½ inch score. Don't need to do anything with the top one. And we'll fold on that score. And we just want to do a dry fit on our roof. And I can see that I want to cut mine's just a little bit too long on the diagonals, so I'm going to decide where I want it and how much I want to trim off, and just come and trim off. And I would say, trim off a little bit at a time. Once you trim anything off the diagonal, just make the corresponding trim on these pieces, and you can just do it on one side, it's symmetrical. And then test that again. And once you have a good fit, we can use that as our template. To cut out our pattern paper. So I'll get my pattern paper cut out, and then I'll be back. So I have my piece cut out now, and I think you can see that I've also scored that ½ inch on the bottom edge. I've prepped it with score tape by putting a piece on the main body and then a separate piece on the tab at the bottom. And now I did ink my edges, and I did test my fit one more time. So now I'm going to remove the backing from the main piece. So there's still backing on the tab down here. And now just get it centered. I have that tab folded so I can use that as a guide. And just get that on there, give that a burnish. And then up here at the top, what we're going to do is cut in a straight line from the corner along the edge all the way to the top. Now you can use a ruler, or you could just kind of go for it there. So I've got those two cuts made. Let me see if I can show you from this side. Hopefully you can see that. So let's take these two short guys and just wrap them. So I'm wrapping these two little ones. And now I'm left with a piece that's sticking out here. It's too long to wrap, so we want to cut that off about even with the top. And now you can wrap that piece to the inside. Of course, you can take your bone folder there. And then finally, On this front edge, you probably need to cut in on the corners at an angle a little bit. And then we can wrap this to the inside to finish off the bottom. Again, give that a nice burnish to flatten up that edge. And I'm going to apply some ink to some of these areas, and here in the notch, up here on these top, and a little bit on this bottom, and then we'll be ready for installation. So you may want to do a dry fit and just see where your roofs are going to end up. You want to make sure that it comes above the bottom of the chimney, obviously, and it just kind of fits up into, you'll see exactly where it should go. Of course, you'll want to keep it straight across here, level with that. And then once you put one in, and you can test one and then test the other, you'll want to measure from the surface, the ground basically, up to the roof so that you get both roofs in at the same level. Mine are, I think, up about 6 5/8 or so from the ground. And then the best place to glue these, you can run a little bead of glue along the bottom edge of the chimney here, but the best place is to come in here on the edge of these triangles. Now the roof overhang is about 1/4 inch, so just don't come past 1/4 inch on each side. Just run a bead of glue there, and on the other side, of course, and then on the bottom of the chimney. And then watch for level and plumb, and you'll be all set. So that concludes the little side roofs. So to make the front roof, it's very similar to the side roofs. We start out with a piece that is 1 3/8 high. This one is only 2 7/8 inch long. So we're still going to find our center. Just look carefully, because this is kind of an odd length of a piece. And then once we have center, we're going to mark 5/8 out on either side of center. 5/8 on either side of center. And we'll cut those triangles off just like we did before. Now the entrance obviously doesn't have a chimney, so there's no notching needed. So just cut these 2 triangles. And then the triangles that are for the sides, they're cut from exactly the same size, and we treat them exactly the same way as we did on the side roofs. So I'll get this cut off and then I'll be back. So here's my little roof assembly. I attached the triangles just like before. Remember, it's the hypotenuse or the long angled side that gets attached. And then when we go to cover with patterned paper, I again have cut a 2 1/4 inch square of my paper because these triangles are the same size as were on our side roofs, so we can cover them in the exact same way. And then for our front here, we can just reuse our template again. And it just needs to be a little bit shorter. So just take it and look at on here and draw a line and shorten it up and use this template again for this front. So I'll do those things, get my roof covered with patterned paper, and then I'll be back. And then we'll install this little roof the same way we did the side roofs by just putting a little bit of glue on our side tabs here. Remember to keep it straight and level with the ground. And there's our little front roof installed. To make the little awning for the front door, we start out with our piece A, and then our piece B, C, just this little 3/8 inch square, and I think it's easier just to cut that with a pair of scissors on the diagonal. And then we just want to take some wet glue and glue these little diagonals. We'll glue the angled side, the hypotenuse, to the ends. And let that thoroughly dry before you move on to the next step. And now that this little piece is bone dry, we can cover it with some pattern paper. And I've cut a piece that is 2.5 inches long by 1.25 inches wide. And I've scored it at 1/2 inch and 2 inches. And then on the bottom edge, I've scored it at 3/8. And then I've backed it with some score tape. I'm just going to crease on these creases that we made here. And start by removing this bigger piece of tape. Now the piece gets centered in between the two score marks. And then we'll just wrap the sides up. And then on the top edges, I'm going to cut right along the top edge of that side. And since there's no backing on there, make sure you hold on to that paper, otherwise it may tear when you pull your scissors away. So again, right along the edge of that chipboard. Then up here on the top, we'll just release some of this. Now we can wrap the top around here. I think actually I need to bring it kind of more even with that edge. Now I'll wrap that around on the top. And then I'm just going to trim a little bit off the sides on an angle. Sorry, my scissors are getting very messy. And over here as well. And remove this backing. Now we can come in at an angle on the sides because we want to wrap the bottom on all the edges. And just wrap that around, and you can see why it's necessary to have this so dry, because otherwise it will just it won't be able to stand up to you handling it this way. And then again down here at the bottom, we'll trim this so we can wrap it. You just have to kind of just take little trims off at a time. It's a little fiddly. And then take your bone folder to it. And now that I've inked the edges, I'll go ahead and install it just a little bit above the door, just with some wet glue.